Excellent. All right. So, Zenet, let's go ahead and get started. And because I can see that, in the waiting room, we have a few more people kind of joining in. And but let's go ahead and get started. And like Kendall said, we're going to record the session and we're going to put it up as part of our education and training for our DEIB committee. So excited to have you here. For those of you that don't know Zenet, Zenet is a member of the Junior League of Austin. She is chairing the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for them this year. And she has, she's done this presentation for the Junior League of Austin and probably for almost every committee at the Junior League, I think, Zenet at this point. But it's a great presentation and she was really kind enough to share it with us. We'll go ahead and let her get started and we'll kind of join in as we go. So Zenet, take it away.
Yeah, so it looks like you have the screen sharing disabled.
Then I will go ahead and share my screen and
cool.
I will pull it up. All right.
Perfect. So thanks everyone for attending the presentation, Say What? Unraveling the Impact of Microaggressions. Again, my name is Zenet Dorsey and I am the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Junior League of Austin. So this is our third year of having this committee and we are going around and presenting this content and some other content. We have an unconscious bias training. We have some other content too. So I'm very pleased to present this to you today. You can go to the next slide. So I want to present my source for this presentation. I am not an expert on this subject. I don't have any type of degree in diversity and equity studies. I'm just volunteering my time and efforts to put together these presentations. And so most of the content for this presentation is courtesy of Erica Merritt, this lovely woman here. She is the founder and principal for Equius Group. And she presented this content to the Association for Junior Leagues International, AGLI's 2019 Organizational Development Institute Conference that I had the pleasure of attending last year. And I was in the diversity and inclusion track and I decided to take this content, put it in a nice little junior league package and use it for our league's purposes. Go to the next slide. So today we will define the different types of microaggressions, explore common microaggressions, and then provide strategies for interrupting microaggressions. Next slide. All right, so what are microaggressions? I feel like we hear this term a lot in social media and just out in the world lately, but I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily fully understand what exactly the term microaggressions means. So microaggressions are derogatory slights or insults directed at a target person or persons who are members of an oppressed group. Microaggressions communicate bias and can be delivered explicitly or implicitly. So these slights or insults come from a place of bias, which is interesting to note because we all have biases, right? No matter who you are, where you come from, what race, ethnicity you are, we all have biases. And so what that means is that we all have the capacity to commit and level microaggressions at people. The title of this presentation is called Say What? Because microaggressions often cause us to say, say what, hold up, when they're directed to you because they can be a shock to the system. And we'll talk a little bit more about the different types of microaggressions. You can go to the next slide. So before we go to better understand microaggressions, and you need to understand where they originate. So I want to talk a little bit more about bias. And again, I have a whole presentation about unconscious bias. But bias is the evaluation of one group and its members relative to the other. And so there's two different types of bias. So if you click on, do one click, there we are. So the first type of bias is explicit bias. So this type of bias is expressed directly. The individual who has the bias is aware of the bias, and this bias operates consciously. So the example I use is that a person will say, I think that Black and brown people are more biased, or more violent. So because of my bias against Black and brown people, I think that they're more violent just by the very fact that they are black and brown. The next type of bias is implicit bias. If you click it again, it'll pop up. Press return again or click. Oh, Lorena, are you there? Oh, did she leave? Oh, wait, we lost her. Oh, did we lose Lorena? I think so. And she was our presenter. Hold on, let's give her a second.
Thanks, Zanette. And maybe when she...
There you are.
Lorena, are you able to make Zanette a co-host and then she can share her screen and she can operate it?
Oh, you're muted.
I did, and I don't know why it didn't take, but let me see if I can make her a, or maybe I can't. All right, let's try this again. I will try to make sure that we don't get disconnected again. Here we go.
Hashtag Zoom life. Yesterday, I was in a meeting with some fairly important people at my company. My husband decides to come in with no shirt on and got into my background. And my VP was like, "Is there a naked man behind you?" So that was a lot of fun. I told my husband, I was like, "Please don't come in without a shirt on."
Awesome. It's okay. I did the exact same thing to my spouse a couple of weeks ago when he was on a very important Zoom call with a big client. I mean, I was in my underwear, but I was just letting the dog go outside. Like,
Right.
It happens.
Yeah,
It does happen.
You just spiced it up and maybe whoever was watching actually enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, he's in pretty good shape, so it definitely added a little bit of spice and color to the otherwise boring meeting. Oh, it looks like we lost her again. Oh, maybe I can send the presentation, like email the presentation to someone else, and then it looks like Lorena's having some internet connectivity issues. She's frozen up now. Does anybody want to send me their email and I can just send over the presentation? Oh. There she is.
Am I back? Sorry, ladies,
Yes,
for this.
You're back.
For the inconvenience here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, now you're frozen up again.
All right, can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, so sorry. Okay, last time. Let's try this out one more time. All right, here we go. All right, this is where I left you, Zanette.
Yes.
So,
And then
sorry.
we talked about explicit bias. The next one is implicit bias. Cool. All right. So as a reminder, explicit bias, expressed directly. We're aware of it. Happens consciously. Implicit bias is the opposite. It's expressed indirectly. We're often unaware of the bias. It operates subconsciously. So rather than just blatantly saying or believing that Black and brown people are more violent, implicit bias, an example is grabbing your purse, instinctively grabbing your purse when you're encountering a Black and brown person on the street. So I would argue that implicit bias is more sinister than explicit bias, because although it operates unconsciously, it guides our behavior, and we're not aware of it. So we have no way or to combat it or to work on it. And so that's why I think implicit bias or unconscious bias is definitely more sinister than explicit bias. And then an implicit bias can transfer to an explicit bias once you become consciously aware of your prejudice or your bias. All right, so let's dive into the history of microaggressions. If you click on the first, yeah, okay. So the term microaggressions it's originated in 1970 by a gentleman named Professor Chester M. Pierce to describe or reference the insults that he had regularly seen non-Black Americans level on Black people. So the term originated to describe an aspect of the Black American experience or something that Black Americans deal on a day-to-day basis in their lives. Next point. Yeah. So then in 1973, 3 years later, a woman named Mary Rove expanded the definition to include aggressions towards women. And then she also coined the term micro inequities. And so it's stuff that we see. So that's kind of like what we talk about the glass ceiling, how women in general are treated differently in areas of the workplace and in other areas of life. And then finally, in 2010, Daryl Wing Sue further expanded the definition of microaggressions to include any aggression towards any marginalized group. So that includes the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, etc. All right, so let's talk about the types of microaggressions. So there's 3 different types of microaggressions. The first is a micro assault. So that is a blatant verbal or non-blatant verbal environmental attack intended to convey your discriminatory or biased sentiments. So this is the biggest and most violent type of microaggression. It's shouting a racial slur or a man groping a woman. It's deliberate and it's on purpose. The next is a micro insult. So this is an unintentional behavior or verbal comment that conveys rudeness or insensitivity or demeans that person's identity. So the example is an employee asking a colleague of color how she got her job, implying that maybe he or she landed it through affirmative action. This is definitely a little bit more tricky to identify. And it's one of those microaggressions that causes you to say what? Because they're subtle, they're spur of the moment, they're backhanded, and it can be hard to tell if the perpetuator is even aware of what they're doing is insulting. Another example is calling a Black person articulate. So that's a micro insult. And then finally, the last microaggression is what Daryl Wing Sue calls the most insidious form of microaggression. It's the micro invalidation. So that's the verbal comment or behavior that excludes, negates, or dismisses the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of the targeted group. So this is when you tell or imply that someone that their experiences of discrimination aren't real. And it makes the person question themselves or blame themselves. So an example of that is when someone tells you that if you were nicer, if you were more polite, if you were more respectable, then people wouldn't discriminate against you. It's that term when you tell a person to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, when you know that there are systemic barriers that prevent this from happening. So it just makes you question, whether the feelings that you're feeling are actually real, and it honestly places at times places the blame on yourself for experiencing, the experiences of discrimination. Any questions so far? All right, so we're just gonna play a game of what's what. So just identify. Now these are junior league examples, but if there are any examples that you experience through your organization, definitely open to hearing those and using those, as part of the presentation. So the first is, so essentially you're just gonna identify what type of microaggression it is by the description. So the first example is your organization holds an event in partnership with a store that only sells clothing up to size 10 and makeup for light skin tones. So this is an example of a micro insult. Next example. One of the women on your committee says, "I don't see you as a minority." So this is a very cogent example of a micro invalidation. You're not seeing the person for who they truly are. And then finally, several members refuse to attend a spring meeting because they say it's being held in a quote unquote ghetto location, and that is a micro insult. All right, I don't know. Do you think that'll work?
You know what? I think I'm gonna pass on the video.
Okay, cool.
Just because of the technical difficulties.
Okay. Well, if you have a chance, if you just go back
sure, yeah.
real quick. If you just have a chance to go to YouTube and click on it, Google Hatch Kids Teenagers Discuss Microaggressions. It's a short video that just talks about how hurtful microaggressions are to young people, children, teenagers. And one thing that was pointed out during this video is that the children reported that they've experienced 291 microaggressions in 90 days. And so that to me was like a stunning statistic, because this is what our children of color are dealing with on a daily basis, in addition to the other challenges that they face. So it's a good short video. If you have time, definitely watch it.
And I'll make sure to post it as well, so this way everybody can see it, on our end. It's for LitOms.
Awesome. And so this was, again, how microaggressions impact members. And so was for league, but this is for any organization. Anytime people are dealing with microaggressions within any organization, you're gonna experience all of these type of feelings. You just keep clicking. So shame, invisibility, burnout, physical symptoms, absenteeism. So you're not gonna want to participate in the organization. Bad member attitude, decreased confidence, turnover. So that's why it's important to identify what microaggressions are and learn to combat them, because microaggressions are detrimental to any organizational growth and member morale. So it's just really important to get them out there, understand them, and fight against them. So within this next slide, this is a little bit more psychological, but when addressing microaggressions, it's important to weigh intention versus impact. Because a lot of times you find out when and we'll talk more about addressing microaggressions, but when you do start addressing microaggressions, there's a lot of, defensibility, a lot of fragility involved, where people are like, well, that's not what I meant to say. And so this framework, which Deborah Plummer calls the intention / impact model, it's designed to expand the concept of dynamics of intention by the sender and impact received in cultural clashes. So we're starting at the top. And so you have 3 different dynamics here. You have the sender, you have the message, and then you have the receiver of the message. And so on the part of the sender, there's intention, and then on the part of the receiver, there's impact. Next, there is a meaning-making process that occurs in between the message being sent and the message being received by the receiver. So the sender is doing a mental check to make sure their words match their intent, and then the receiver is taking in what's being said and experiencing an impact. So if the impact is felt as positive, then there's effective communication. The sender acknowledges the impact and we're good. So you say something, the receiver's like, okay, cool. And then you move on. But if the impact is experienced as negative, then the communication is ineffective. And at this point, the impact needs to be shared and acknowledged by the sender, and the intention needs to be clarified in order to get to that effective communication. And I have an example to show you how this all comes together. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of the intention versus impact, there's also other dynamics that this exchange is affected by. So there's your energy level and your state of mind. I don't know about you, but I don't receive things well before I have coffee in the morning. So that impact or that message is probably not going to be received so well, you know, at 8 o'clock in the morning before I've had coffee. There's also relationship and frequency of interaction. So as a receiver, if I'm comfortable with you, then I'm easily able to assume positive intent. Senders are able to convey intention better when there's a close relationship. And then there's power dynamics. The exchange definitely gets more complicated if the person is my boss. So the sender may, you know, send in a different way, and then as a receiver, you know, I may interpret it in a different way, and I also may feel that I can't ask for clarification or confront the sender if it is someone who has in a power dynamic. And that also affects with power dynamics in our outside of work. So a person of color may not, you know, receive the message from a police officer and feel comfortable, you know, challenging that message because of the power dynamic. And so then you also want to consider the context. You definitely want to focus on the statement or action, and then you want to take care of yourself and not the offender. So the example, the photo here is "don't touch my hair." And so that's a good example of a microaggression. And it's something that I experienced personally as a Black woman. So as you know, Black women's hair, maybe you don't know, but Black women's hair is often the subject of like equal parts ridicule and scorn, but also equal parts adoration. There's always something, every time we change our hair or do something with our hair, there's always a comment about it, or especially like in the workplace. So the example is, I was in the bathroom one time at a bar when we could go outside. This happened last year, a couple years ago. And I'm in the bathroom, I walk into the bathroom. At the time I had some like faux dreadlocks, and they were really cute. They're pretty. But there's a stranger who walked up to me and asked me, "Can I touch your hair?" And so her intent was positive. I'm sure she thought my hair was beautiful, and, you know, like all pretty things, she wanted to touch it. Maybe she had never seen, you know, hair like that. But the impact was that I felt objectified. And I also didn't know if she had washed her hands, because I just walked in the bathroom and she standing in the bathroom. Plus I don't know her. I don't want strangers talking to me. So I interpreted her intent as negative, and I said no. So then she said, "Why?" which I interpreted it as negative again, because you're questioning why I don't want you touching me. So I then clarified her impact and said, "Because I'm not an animal in a petting zoo," and I walked away. Now, I don't know if she, you know, never ever acknowledged the impact, but hopefully it gave her food for thought. But that's just kind of a real world example of that whole intention versus impact interaction. All right. Recovering from a microaggression. So we live in a world of non-apology. And so if you have a microaggression leveled at you, it's really important, number one, to address it, because not addressing the microaggression is worse than, I feel like, at times worse than the actual microaggression itself. But you definitely want to focus on your impact and get past your intention. And then if you are the one leveling the microaggression, that point number one is really important. You know, we a lot of times get very defensive and say, you know, we focus on our intention saying, well, I didn't mean to say that, or I didn't mean, that's not what I meant. But the person who received the microaggression, the impact was, regardless of your intention, the impact was negative. So you definitely want to focus on your impact and get past your intention. You definitely want to let down your defenses and don't put the person who, the target of the microaggression, in the position of trying to make you feel better. You don't want to flip it around and turn yourself and make yourself seem like the victim. And then here's some sample language. Like I said, we live in a world of non-apology. We definitely don't want to say, oh, I'm sorry if I offended you. We want to recognize that you did offend someone and that your impact was negative. And so you say, hey there, I was wondering if I could talk to you for a second. The other day I said something that I think was offensive. I have thought about it and I want to apologize to you. I know my words have an impact and I'm sorry for the impact that they made on you. I value our relationship. And I want you to know I'm aware of what I said. I take responsibility for it and I'm working on it. So 100% taking ownership of that microaggression that you leveled on someone and that the impact that they had on it, that microaggression had on them, because microaggressions hurt. So then you move forward and know that the person has the right to not to accept your apology. I mean, that is 100% the right of people. We also live in a world where we want closure at all times, but people don't have to accept your apology, especially if the microaggression is something that's particularly egregious.
You know, Zanette, and I'll make a note here. I know that that's really important, especially, you know, in our world where maybe we're bosses, we're owners, and we're supervisors. And we need to be able to go ahead and accept that maybe we said something inappropriate at one time and kind of make that apology. Because I think a lot of times, I know me being in the industry, you know, you've had bosses that say something and you're just kind of like, wow, that was really inappropriate. And it's meant the world for them to come back and say, you know, I realized that I said this and I was very offensive. I apologize. You know, I hope that that's still, you know, that we can actually still continue working well together in the future. And it's been it's been something of value to me to be able to know that, you know, that was acknowledged and that we can definitely, you know, that I was actually worth that conversation and that he realized or she realized that, you know, they said something inappropriate. So I think that's really important, especially as, like I said, in this industry and as we're, you know, most of us somewhere along the line own or operate or, you know, direct other people in this. So I think that's really important to know. And I'll move on to allies.
Yeah, so I always like to talk, any D&I, talk about allyship. It's a term that is used a lot. And it also is not necessarily understood well. You know, people think that you can just post on Twitter, on Instagram or social media, I'm an ally, and that's what allyship is, and it's not. Allyship is someone who takes action to support an underrepresented or marginalized group, but is not themselves a member of the group. So one can be an ally for members of any underrepresented or marginalized group. So those who are defined by racial identity, gender, faith identity, sexual orientation. And there's three points to allyship. Allyship is aspirational. It is not achieved by one task, but it remains an aspirational identity pursued by constant engagement. Again, it's not posted on social media. It's constant engagement, constant action. Allyship is not permanent. So you can be an ally one day and then you lose your allyship card in the other by those within that marginalized or underrepresented group. Allyship means respecting the agency of others. And then allyship is not being a savior. And a true allyship is public. So I use this example of Octavia Spencer and Jessica Chastain because this is one real life example of true allyship. Octavia Spencer and Jessica Chastain, they worked together. They were working together on the movie The Help. And Spencer says they were talking one day and they got on the topic of unequal pay. And Spencer told her, she said, look, women of color, we make less than white women. So if we're going to have a conversation about pay equity, then we're going to have to bring women of color to the table. And up until that point, Jessica Chastain didn't realize that women of color were frequently paid less than white women working on the same movies. And so Jessica Chastain decided, you know what, that's not fair. And I'm going to use my privilege to be a true ally to my colleague. And she revealed that she would negotiate their salaries for the upcoming film of The Help and promised that they would make the same amount. And based on Chastain using her privilege, she was able to negotiate a salary for Spencer 5 times the amount than Octavia Spencer probably would have normally made. So that's just a really good example of using your privilege and true allyship to make a difference. So this final slide is the inclusion matrix. And so this is something I always like to include on my slides, but it just shows the different levels of, yes, it was that much lower. And that's actually pretty, Kendall says 5 times, yeah, it was that much lower. And that's pretty common in Hollywood, when you think about it. So women, number one, are paid less than men. And then when you put women of color, it's even less. So we're at the bottom of the totem pole. So this inclusion matrix weighs uniqueness versus belongingness. And so we always want to get to that bottom right of true inclusion. Exclusion obviously is low belongingness and low value of uniqueness. So you're treating individuals within your organization as a complete outsider. We also don't want to practice or promote assimilation. And that what that is like an individual is treated as an insider when they conform to the dominant culture norms and play down their uniqueness. So that's saying, okay, we're cool as long as you play by our rules. Now, differentiation is that the individual is not treated as an insider, but their unique characteristics are seen as value or required for success. So that's tokenism, saying that, okay, we're going to have our one person of color to meet our quota, and we definitely don't want to be there either. We want to be an inclusion, that inclusion box. The individual is treated as an insider, and they're encouraged to retain their uniqueness. We want people within all of our organizations that we're a part of, whether it's volunteer, whether it's working, in the workplace. We want people to be treated as insiders and valued for who they are, and that they can feel that they can be their true and authentic selves whenever they step into a room or they attend a meeting or whenever they're around the people within the organization. So that is the next slide is just my sources. So if you want to learn more, if you want to read up on microaggressions or read some of the sources that I use for the presentation, there they are. Also, I don't want to take credit for the content because I didn't build this. I want to cite my sources, but I definitely, if there's any questions, please let me know. And thank you for letting me present to you today.
Yay. I will definitely share all of this with everybody. Thank you so much for everybody attending. I appreciate it. Zanette, you were amazing. Thank you for this information. Does anybody have any questions? I know I can now see the chat room and everything, so that's awesome.
I love Zanette. Thank you so much. I'm aware of and have been doing work in this space, and so I've heard the phrase intent versus impact a lot, but I hadn't heard it explained quite the way that you and Lorena did with in regards to just like that work example or anyway, just I think when I have recognized it and then tried to apologize for it, I've still said, oh, I didn't mean to say that. What I meant to say was this. I'm so sorry it made you feel that way. And instead of just cutting out that whole first part. And so I just appreciate the way that y'all framed it today as a further learning step.
Yeah, no, actually, I think that this opens a lot of learning doors for all of us, as especially in our industry and as our organization grows. And Kendall, thank you so much for Kendall. By the way, Zanette is our current president, and Stacy is going to be our new president. She's our president-elect. But it's great to be able to open these doors and really start learning more and being able to share more. So thanks to Kendall for starting all this. So I think that's awesome.
And let's see that implicit bias traded.
Yeah, absolutely. That's gonna be next. So and Stacey says, what would be the recommendation for being inclusive and not having a token person boxed where to start? I guess that's her question right there. Jenna, do you want to take a stab at the question? Or so Stacey's saying, what would be the recommendation for being inclusive? You never want to have just that one token person, and I think it starts. Right. you know, if it's going to be, I think in the workplace, Stacy, where I would say is you want to start with your hiring practices to start off with. You want to make sure that it's not that you're hiring, you know, that token person, but that you are making, you're kind of reducing those barriers to entry that Jeanette mentioned earlier. You know, making sure, like, for instance, a good example is advertising in all places, as opposed to sometimes we only advertise maybe on Poached, where we know that not everybody has access to the internet or maybe has access to poached jobs. So we try to make sure that we're advertising those jobs across all forms and media. So this way you're actually reaching out to everyone and giving everybody that opportunity to apply for jobs. You know, same thing with membership. That's something I think we've done here in the last couple of years, you know, to the organization, is that to go ahead and put that out there to everyone in all sorts of, you know, for us in all sorts of industries across the culinary or food and beverage industry. So we're accepting everyone across the, you know, our lines. And then I think Michelle says, it's not an excuse, but after working in a kitchen for so long, sometimes I don't even know if a coworker has been offended by me or coworkers until I notice that they seem to be acting different towards me to the person that has offended them. What's the best way to approach that situation without making it weird? You know, I'd say also, you know, Michelle, sometimes it's just having a conversation. And sometimes it's not just having that conversation in the middle of the kitchen, but maybe not so much pulling the person aside, but finding the right time and the right place to have a conversation and just kind of ask, you know, I've noticed that, you know, there's kind of an awkwardness between us, or maybe, you know, I've just seen that you're maybe having a hard time here. You know, is there something that maybe I said that was maybe inappropriate, or was there something, you know, you have to really approach the situation, I think, Zanette, is that, you know.
Yeah. And I think also accepting that it's probably going to be weird. I think that we all are like, we don't, and that's just human nature, right? Like we all shy away from discomfort and weirdness and anything that makes us uncomfortable. We just don't want to do it. And the bottom line is it's going to be an uncomfortable situation. If you have leveled a microaggression at somebody, it's made them uncomfortable. Number one, first of all, they got uncomfortable. And so just accepting that it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be weird, but owning that, sitting in it and discussing it and talking about it and being open and honest about it and taking ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a great example. And I think that's what everybody kind of gets scared of in the beginning, is that it is going to be awkward. It is a difficult conversation. I don't want to have it. I want to shy away from it. But I think that, you know, if you just accept the fact that it is going to be hard, but, you know, you can get through it, and just actually really just acknowledging what happened, I think is huge right then. And you can actually avoid the long-term awkwardness.
Exactly.
After that. So, yeah. Any other questions, ladies? That's funny. Ha, I can own weird. Thank you. So Michelle said. I love it. Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that will round up our training session today. Thank you for putting up with my technical difficulties earlier, but I think we're good, and I will make sure that we post this for other members. I'll try to edit, you know, the technical difficulties out first before we put that all together. Zanette, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and all of your materials with us today. So have a great week. Please make sure you take care and enjoy Labor Day, everybody.
Yeah,
you too.
Thanks, Lorena.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.